Although the specific epithet is the describing name of a scientific name, or the species name, you could also call it, sometimes in urban areas we get more specific than the specific epithet. So no longer is it good enough to say, such as this example, a sugar maple, Acer saccharum. We may be asking, what cultivar of Acer saccharum is this? What type of sugar maple is this? Let's dive in a little further. So hold on, we're looking at two species, and when we look at these photos you might think they're two different species, but they are in fact the exact same species. Gladitia triacanthos, which is a honey locust, that's a species you're going to learn a little bit later this semester, can look very different on the landscape. There are some in the wild that will be covered in nasty thorns. I pity any of you that go out to the field and have to work or climb in a nasty tree like that. But it happens. There are also honey locusts that are thornless. Both are Gladitia triacanthos. One variety is thornless, while the remaining trees have thorns. So let's break that down a little bit and try to get a better understanding. We already know that in the plant kingdom, we start out very basic. It is a plant, it is an animal, and we narrow it down from there. And through a process of elimination, we get as far down to family when it starts to really get relevant for us in the landscape. Family, in this example, we're using Acer acea, that is the maple family. And then we break down that genus into specifically Acer, the maples. And what type of maple is that? Well, that's what we are working on this semester right now, is breaking it down to species, platanoides. In this case, we are talking about a Norway maple. But many times, when we're identifying a tree, a Norway maple, it may be a Norway maple, but they may look a little bit different. Okay, so there are another categories of descriptions we can use to help us better define what type of Norway maple we have. Sometimes they are varieties, sometimes they are cultivars, sometimes they are hybrids. Okay, hybrids, first of all, typically are broken out a little bit differently, and we've talked about this, and you'll see examples of this with some of our species in our study this semester. A hybrid is a cross-pollination of two different species, sometimes two different genera, but most of the time between two different species, and that will be highlighted with an X in the scientific name, telling us that that species has been cross-pollinated between two different species. Okay, this can occur in the wild, and it can also occur in a cultivated setting. But hybrids are a little bit different in that they are actually creating a new species many times. Okay, what we're going to focus on in particular are cultivars and varieties, in that they are still the same species, but there's a little bit more description to explain what these species are about. The first one is variety. You may also hear it called a subspecies. Okay, but the key points to remember about a variety is that the differences. So remember our honey locust example. In the wild, you may see some with thorns all over it, and some that do not have either. Okay, with those examples, these are differences that occur in nature. Okay, so a variety is a species of tree, honey locust, Gladitia triacanthos, that has clear and marked differences in the species, and it occurs naturally in the wild. Okay, so this could be like a recessive gene, or it could be just a genetic characteristic or a strain within certain species that are passing on a marked difference. Okay, so when we see that, first of all, we categorize the scientific name as Gladitia triacanthos. Okay, but if we are recognizing in our scientific name that it is a thornless Gladitia triacanthos, you would see this at the end. Variety inermis. Okay? Variety, again, occurs in nature, but is a clear and marked difference. So the seed germination is mostly true to type in that some seeds, they all produce honey locusts, but some have thorns, some do not. Okay? The thornless ones will have variety. So any variety, when you see VAR, that just tells us, okay, there's a marked difference in this species, but this is a naturally occurring difference. Inermis just tells us that this is the thornless honey locust. Okay, you won't always see this at the end of a scientific name. Sometimes we'll just say Gladitia triacanthos, and that's fine, you are correct. That's just a little bit more of a description, a little bit more information for us in that variety. Okay, so Gladitia triacanthos, variety inermis. Okay, in the wild, there is Gladitia triacanthos again, and you see these seed pods everywhere. Beautiful, huge seed pods that the tree produces. In urban settings, we may not always see this because not only are some varieties thornless, but there may be some that are sterile and don't reproduce seed as well. Okay, when we get into no, I'll hold off on that thought. I'm going to come back to that seed thought. But first of all, another example. I forgot I had this in here. Another example are a Douglas fir. Okay, where there is one Pseudotsuga menziesii, as you probably know, one Douglas fir. But that Douglas fir is broken down into two varieties, Glauca and menziesii. Okay, which is interesting because it's Pseudotsuga menziesii, variety menziesii. But what that's doing is that it is recognizing that in the wild, Douglas fir grows in two different ways. Okay, we have the coast Douglas fir, which are the monsters that we are used to seeing on the west coast in the temperate rainforest of British Columbia. But there is also an inland Douglas fir called Rocky Mountain Douglas fir. And this you will see more in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, in around Banff and Jasper National Parks, where the trees don't grow as large, but they are a little more adapted to growing in drier growing conditions, colder growing conditions, and their genetics have actually changed a little bit. Same tree, same seeds, same reproduction techniques, but their growing environments have actually kind of separated them out to be considered to have two different varieties. Okay, going back to the other one I was trying to get to earlier, I got ahead of myself. We also have cultivars. Cultivars are similar to varieties in that they are trees of the same species that have clear and marked differences, but they are still considered the same species. The difference is they are cultivated. They are grown in a nursery or in a cultivated setting. Okay, so think of variety as something that happens in the wild. Think of cultivars as something that must be assisted by humans in order to reproduce the tree. Okay, so a tree that produces sterile seed cannot reproduce. So that may be a cultivar, like the honey locust that was not producing seed, right? We've probably grown them from vegetative cuttings in order to graft and produce new trees. So in a cultivar, we are growing these trees for desired traits. Okay, they may be grafted and the seed may not be reliable. Okay, so here Acer platanoides tells us it's a Norway maple, but now that clear and marked difference is a Crimson King Norway maple, has red foliage all year long. That is something that has been developed in a nursery, in a lab, to have that red foliage all year long. It doesn't happen naturally. Okay, it can to a certain degree. Some trees, some Norway maples will produce seed with a reddish color to it, but it's just not reliable. It's not consistent, so it makes it harder when nurseries are trying to sell that as their product. Okay, so they grow those in a cultivated setting through grafting and through cloning of the trees in order to have a consistent growth pattern. Okay, so there is our Norway maple, Crimson King. Okay, previous, just a regular green. In here we have a Crimson King, Norway maple with that red foliage. That will not grow in the wild. It may have a reddish strain from seeds from the offspring, but it's not consistent. So this carries that red forward. And we do that through grafting, again, in a cultivated setting. Some examples of red maple. This makes a challenge sometimes when you're trying to identify trees, is cultivars, hybrids, and varieties, depending on species, can give a range in what the foliage looks like. So all of these are red maple, and you can see in the listing below all of the different cultivar names. Okay, and I'm seeing that in some of your assignments when you're submitting them. You may say something like autumn blaze maple, and that's often what the nurseries call it or what they sell it as. But in that case, they are assuming that you know that it is a red maple or a hybrid of red maple called a Freeman maple, and more specifically, it is autumn blaze. So in these cases, they're all the same tree, but there are some marked differences, and most of the time with these cultivars, it has to do with their form or their color for fall color, the consistency of the color, the specific colors, things like that. Sometimes it may have to do with their structure and their overall form, but it is separating these trees out to have yes, they're all red maple, but they have a specific growth characteristic.